Conventional motorcycling wisdom says that when you're buying your first motorcycle, it needs to be something cheap, it needs to be something with not a lot of power, and it should be something used that you're not afraid of dropping. The idea is that you're supposed to use this motorcycle as something to learn on. It's not something you're gonna keep because you're meant to drop it, beat it up, learn how to ride, and then send it off to the next beginner. The problem with that is you inherently don't care about the motorcycle because it's not your bike. It's just some temporary addition to the garage while you wait for your next bike. That issue's given rise to a second pearl of wisdom, something that contradicts that mode of thought. And it's something that I was told when I was buying my first motorcycle. You should buy your second bike first. Skip the beginner bike, skip the one that's temporary, and get the one that you want, the one that you can grow into. That rule of thought is flawed too, because a lot of second motorcycles fall into the middleweight category. Bikes that are making north of 100 horsepower and cost way over 10 grand. But it seems like the team at Honda have been thinking about this conundrum and are attempting to solve it with this bike, the CB750. A 750-ish cc motorcycle putting down 90 horsepower, 55 foot-pounds of torque, but only costing you $8,000 MSRP. So the question is, does this thing solve that problem, or is it just another bike with too much power for a beginner?
So what's the actual riding experience on the Hornet 750 like? Well, this thing is a unique little bike because it's got a lot of things that I would expect to see on bigger bikes and a lot of things that I would also expect to see on smaller bikes. So it really does split the difference between beginner and intermediate. First off, let's talk power. So this thing has the motor out of the Transalp, which is one of my favorite little parallel twins. But the thing is, it's not really alive at the top. Once you start getting past 80 miles an hour, you're asking it to do a lot once you're moving at highway speeds. Accelerating from 80 to 100 takes a lot longer than going from 40 to 80. So in that sense, definitely a lot more beginnery. But then once you actually start riding it in the twisties, the power's delivered a little bit more abruptly, a little bit more aggressively. Not by a ton, but this is a nice, usable amount of power. Enough that's actually going to keep somebody with a couple of years under their belt happy. The only thing that I'm noticing that's kind of like holding the riding experience back is the quick shifter. I noticed this on the Transalp 750 when I rode that. The quick shifter's really not the best. It gets better the faster the motorcycle is going, but the 1 to 2 shift on this bike, it is very jerky. 2 to 3, not great, and then after that, it's totally fine. Handling is great. The bike is light, it dips into a corner fast. The only thing I'm noticing is that the suspension isn't really sprung for me. Big surprise. If you're a smaller person, you won't notice the rear end sagging nearly as much. It's going to feel a lot better for you, and the riding position is going to feel a little bit better. As a taller guy, I feel a little bit cramped. Lastly, let's talk brakes. They're fine. They're totally fine. They're not the best, they're not the worst. They would be massively improved with the inclusion of steel lines instead of rubber lines, but budget price tag, so I will cut it a little bit of slack, although I'd really like to see that changed.
So starting at the back of the bike, this thing only has a 160 rear tire on here. I would have liked to see a full-size 180 just because there's more tire sizes available. Yes, 160s can be cheaper to run, but at the end of the day, if you're trying to hunt down tires, sometimes it's more convenient just to pay a little bit of extra money for the full-size 180 to have more available options. Moving a little bit forward to the seat here, this is a small motorcycle. I am 6'3" with a 32-inch inseam, and as you can see, mounting up on this thing, it's pretty small underneath me. I don't really have a ton of room to move forward and backwards, and this passenger seat is kind of bumping into my tailbone. Most people are not as tall as I am though, so chances are it's gonna fit you great. Coming down from the seat to the motor, instead of having a sight glass window, we actually have a dipstick for our oil measurements. A sight glass window is so much more convenient, and there's a lot less room for error when it comes to one of those. It's just, dipsticks are cheaper than sight glass windows. There's also not a lot of room down there. Next up, we got to talk the suspension. It is non-adjustable. It is Showa and it does feel pretty good, but we've only got preload in the rear and nothing up front. It would have been nice to see something going on here just because an adjustable suspension is more scalable, but I get it. It's a cheaper motorcycle, so gotta save some money somewhere else, which is exactly what they did with those rubber lines. And then we arrive at the dashboard, which is one of the best representations of the tech package on this motorcycle. As you can see, we've got a bunch of different rider modes in here, as well as 2 customizable rider modes. If we dive into these, you can see that the power is scalable, as well as the traction control and the engine braking, and you can disable the traction control if you want. That is a seriously surprising piece of scalability, and it's one of this motorcycle's secret weapons. The only piece of tech it's missing is cruise control, but I did some looking, and there are aftermarket cruise control modules that you can put on this thing. But because the technology on this bike is so scalable, it makes a motorcycle that would be typically too much for a beginner actually work for somebody with limited experience. Now, usually I wouldn't suggest you go get yourself like a middleweight naked bike, something like an MT-09, and then ride it in the lowest power mode until you feel comfortable turning them up. The reason why is typically a rain mode just softens the initial throttle response, and then it gives you full power a little bit later on, usually after like 5,000 or 6,000 RPM. So it may start out slow, and then it starts to feel like a rocket ship later in the power band, and that surge can be a little bit intimidating. However, this is one of the first motorcycles where I actually think that works. So what we're gonna do is I wanna show you the relative 0 to 60 times of each one of these modes back to back. As I'm concerned, there's really only one company that does rider modes the right way, and that is Ducati, where every single rider mode has a completely different fuel map and a completely different peak power. The Hornet here does the exact same thing that pretty much every other motorcycle does, where you have one mode that is basically what the bike was designed to be. In this case, that would be sport mode, and then when you drop it into rain mode, the bike is a lot more calmed down because they artificially reduce the throttle response and the initial power output. But it's worth pointing out, once you get the bike moving, it's still putting down a very similar amount of power to the rest of the power band. It's usually for that reason alone that I don't recommend you run out and buy a fancier motorcycle with a bunch of ride modes and then just pop it into rain mode. The thing is, on this bike, it's not making a crazy amount of power to begin with. Remember, that 90 horsepower figure, that's at the crank, not at the wheels. So in reality, it's making closer to like 80 or 85. So what you end up with when you use the softer rain mode here is a bike that feels like it's making about 47 horsepower. Don't get me wrong, if you ask it to boogie, it will boogie. But you have to work it to get it to move. Now, it's true that what I'm saying requires some self-awareness and some self-control. But here's the thing. I look at my analytics more than anybody on the planet other than Whitney, and Google tells me that most people watching my content
are between 25 and 45, grown-ass adults. You are capable of making the decision of what ride mode to put in your bike. And as a side note, I own a Super Duke, and on the racetrack, I ride it in street mode with no real concern about all the other fast boys making fun of me, because street mode is where I feel comfortable. Don't listen to the idiots on the internet telling you that you're slow because you ride your bike in rain mode. But what this bike is that most other bikes in this category are not, is it's scalable.
Last up, I want to talk about something that's a little bit harder to quantify, and we're going to call that the keepability of this motorcycle. Could this be a bike that you line up at bike night with next to a bunch of fancier motorcycles and still feel good about it? Because let's face it, sometimes you're going to line up with your beginner bike next to the fancier bikes and take a look at it and be like, shoot, it really is time for an upgrade, huh? Is this a motorcycle that I could foresee staying in your garage for more than a couple of years? And the honest answer is yeah, because it does such a good job of splitting the difference between budget beginner parts in easy to upgrade places and higher build quality everywhere else. Let's talk about the stuff that's hard to upgrade. Your touch points on the bike, your controls, the dashboard, all of that stuff feels good. You've got the phone connectivity if that's something you're interested in. I gotta shout out those rider modes again, because that specifically adjustable power level, engine braking, and traction control, you don't see that on a lot of motorcycles, even still in the middleweight category. But then you start poking the plastic pieces and they don't feel creaky and cheap like they do on something like an MT-07. Where you see the corners cut are places like the brake lines. We have rubber lines, which, like I said earlier on, they work fine, they're okay, but they are the first thing that I would change on this bike. And in fact, I would recommend that you spend the money to do it, because again, this thing feels like a motorcycle that's worth investing in. If somebody were to ask me, should I spend some money on this thing? I would say sure. Grab yourself a tail tidy, get an exhaust, get a tune, do all the stuff that you would want to do to your motorcycle to make it yours. Not to mention, a bike like this is going to be dirt cheap to run in the long term. If you make sure you're doing your oil changes at 3,000 miles and you don't skip your valve services, this thing will last as long as you want it to. This right here is officially my new go-to recommendation for beginner bikes. If you want to get on a motorcycle in 2026, this is the one I recommend you take a look at. Honda really did manage to thread a needle with this motorcycle in a way that I didn't think could be done. They've given you a platform that's worth owning at a cheap price that you actually can grow into. And that's really difficult to do. So, solid job, Honda.